Hi, I'm Brad Staats. I want to talk to you today about learning, how we can make sure that we never stop learning so that we can stay relevant, reinvent ourselves, and thrive. I want to start our discussion late in a basketball game in the NBA on April 6, 2018. The Memphis Grizzlies had fought back from a deficit to take a lead 93-92. The Sacramento Kings called a timeout with 6 seconds left. They then inbounded the ball to rookie Bogdan Bogdanovic, who drove, pulled up to hit a difficult jump shot to win the game. Now, winning the game by itself for the Kings is not what's interesting here. Instead, let's think about what the losing coach, Memphis Grizzlies head coach J.B. Bickerstaff, really learned about his team and his starting lineup in particular. Two roughly equal teams, the Kings won 5 more games than the overall 82-game season played, and the other team barely won the game. The next game out, 2 days later, Bickerstaff changed his starting lineup, and in doing so, provides anecdotal evidence of a much larger issue. You see, it turns out we often create our own problems in learning. Someone else isn't the problem, we are. In the case of basketball, we see the example that we incorrectly assume the outcome of the game provides more meaning than it actually does. See, there was research done looking at 20 years of data, over 23,000 games. What they found was that coaches were more likely to change the starting lineup after a close loss than after a close win. That's what this figure here is showing. The negative scores are a loss, so as a bigger negative loss, lose by more points, you're much more likely to change. We see, though, with a win, right, less likely to change, and that shift at 0 is quite significant, quite large, right? What's interesting is this change we see even when the team was expected to lose, or even when the loss was due to factors outside of the team's control, say an opponent's free throw percentage. It's an example that we fail to look at the process. We think the outcome is really the story, and yet the process is where the learning occurs. And this failure is a big one. It's one we see over and over again. As basketball coach Tom Izzo notes, today's society wants to skip the process. I hate that. Do the little things right to reach the big goals. Process example is a part of a bigger problem around learning. You see, to succeed in the new environment requires continual learning. How do we do existing tasks better? How do we do entirely new things? If we fail to learn, we risk becoming irrelevant. We end up solving yesterday's problems too late instead of tackling tomorrow's problems before someone else does. The question of how to learn effectively is one that's bothered me for many years when I was working in investment banking, strategic planning, and venture capital. So I decided to go back to school to get my doctorate, and I've spent the last 14 years in academia trying to understand why we don't learn and what we can do about it. What I've done is bring together an operations mindset together with behavioral science to try to understand learning. And I've come to appreciate that we're bad at learning, supremely bad. In fact, we're often our own worst enemies. Instead of doing the things that will help us learn, we do just the opposite. So I've written Never Stop Learning to help us first figure out what we need to do to be a dynamic learner. Second, identify why we don't do those things. And third, understand the steps to take to overcome the challenge. Learning is so vital today that we can think of ourselves as living in a learning economy. We can't just be knowledge workers. We must also be learning workers. As Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has said, ultimately the learn-it-all will always do better than the know-it-all. The constant change that requires learning, really the drivers of the learning economy, I would suggest are 5-fold. First, it's routinization. Through standard processes and different types of technology, we've been able to take out the simple stuff. We can basically avoid reinventing the wheel and do things more productively. We see this in all kinds of contexts. From agriculture, back in the 1850s in the US, 65% of jobs were agricultural. 1910, it was 32%. 2015, it's 2%. And yet, we see productivity has increased many factors. The same number of people can do much more than ever before. In manufacturing, interestingly, if we look at the job losses from 2000 to 2010 in the US, there was a study looking at why did those job losses occur. What was found was that 13% of the losses were from offshoring, typical, say, sending a job to China, but 87% were from productivity increases. Routinization is allowing us to put our attention elsewhere. Second factor is specialization. Since at least the time of Adam Smith, we've known that when work is divided up into smaller pieces, individuals can specialize on a given task. They can learn, they can improve dramatically. Something like medicine, studies suggest a physician would need to read 29 hours a day to stay current. Since we only have 24, that's not possible, and so we've seen an explosion of specialties. At the same time, we also have to integrate. We have to deliver an overall product or service, and so we need to bring expertise together. We have to learn how to work with others, and those others are constantly changing. Fourth, we have globalization. Latter part of the 20th century, numerous economies opened up their labor markets, led by, say, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, but others as well. And so now we've seen a flood of talented individuals and companies increasing competition. Finally, we have digitization. Well, you can think of this as scalability. We used to be constrained in how we delivered, say, services by geography, but information and communication technologies have broken these bonds. We can reach out thanks to the internet, thanks to digital technologies, to an ever larger world. In addition, because the marginal cost of an information product is close to zero, costs very little to sell a second copy once we've invested in the first one, it's economically attractive to sell one's work much broader than ever before. So all of these drivers mean learning is, I would suggest, more important than it's ever been before, and yet the struggle is, we're not as good as we need to be. What I found is that to be a dynamic learner requires 8 key elements. First, we need to value failure. Dynamic learners are willing to fail in order to learn. Second, we focus on the process rather than the outcome, recognizing that outcome focus is misguided because we don't know how we got there, whereas a process focus frees us to learn. Third, we ask questions rather than rush to answers. I don't know is a fair place to start as long as we quickly follow with a question. Fourth, we need to reflect. We fight the urge to act just for the sake of acting, recognizing that when the going gets tough, the tough are rested, recharged, and take time to think. Next, we need to be ourselves. We don't try to conform, we're willing to stand out. Going along with that, we play to strengths. We don't try to fix irrelevant weaknesses. Instead, we focus on what we're good at and use that to move forward. Seventh, we combine specialization and variety, building a T-shaped portfolio of experiences, deep in one area or more, broad in others. Finally, we make sure to learn from others. Individual learning is not just an individual story. It's not a solo exercise. Others play an important role. For today's discussion, I'm going to pick one of those, process, that I set up at the beginning, to focus on. A focus on process is incredibly powerful. It allows us to do 3 important things. First, identify when things are going wrong. Tachi Ono, founder of the Toyota production system, what we now know as Lean, has a quote I love, saying, "Having no problems is the biggest problem of all." It's a recognition that there are always things that we can improve upon. When we focus on the process, we start to see those. Dave Brailsford came to fame leading Great Britain's Team Sky, and eventually Team Great Britain in the 2012 Olympic Games, had a focus on the process, everything around how do we do it 1% better. Eventually that translated to outcomes, back-to-back Tour de France championships, 70% of the gold medals being won by Team Great Britain at the 2012 Olympic Games. But that focus was on some obvious things. How do we train more effectively? How do we eat right? But also things that maybe didn't get as much attention. How do we wash our hands the right way? What are the right pillows that are going to lead to the best sleep? What massage gel helps riders recover more quickly from that hard training? But as we focus more and more, right, we can figure out what are the things that are going wrong. College football coach Nick Saban notes when you have a system, you kind of get in a routine of what's important. And then you spend a lot more time thinking of things that would make it better. The second powerful part of a process focus is that we're able to build models. You see, when we make decisions, we always have some kind of a model. Sometimes it's an analytical one. We, play with the data, work through things in Excel or elsewhere. Often it's just a mental model. We have an idea of how the world works. When we focus on the process, we can build a stronger, more formal model. Think about a game like blackjack. It's a card game. You're adding up the cards to get to 21. Face cards are worth 10. An ace is 1 or 11. Everything else is the number on the card. As a player, you get 2 cards. The dealer, one face up, you can see, one face down. The player then has a decision to make. When should I take a card? When should I stay? The risk is if you go over 21, you lose. The dealer gets your money. Once you stay, the dealer then takes cards. Usually, the dealer might hit on 16, take another card on 16, and stay put on 17. And so you're trying to weigh the probability of what is the card you're going to get, what is the card the dealer is going to get. The interesting thing about blackjack, because we know how many cards there are in a deck, because we know all of the possible moves, we can create a full model. We can build that out with enough time, and then identify the right move to take. Now, some situations are better than others. You have a better chance of winning, but we can always identify the optimal move. The challenge, of course, is that in our real-world settings, we don't have every possible move identified, right? We're not sure what we should do. But as we start to build improved models, then we increase our chances of getting to a better outcome. Also, as we build better models, we can identify causality, right? What leads from A to B, as opposed to a simple relationship, a simple correlation between the two. Third and finally, when we focus on the process, we can foster discipline. This is helpful as we get distractions. John Steinbeck, when he was writing The Grapes of Wrath, kept a journal. I love this quote that I think captures the idea, saying, "In writing, habit seems to be a much stronger force than either willpower or inspiration. Consequently, there must be some little quality of fierceness until the habit pattern of a certain number of words is established. There's no possibility, in me at least, of saying, I'll do it if I feel like it." In other words, as we have that focus on what do we need to do to get from A to B, all of these tie together. We identify the problems, we build the models, and we do it again and again. So the question, of course, is, if process focus is so powerful for learning, why don't we do it? Well, as we started with the example from the NBA, turns out we incorrectly assume the outcome provides more meaning than it actually does. We think the win or loss tells us the win, we followed a good process. The loss, we followed a bad process. But all of us can think of in our lives when we did all of the right things, we just came out on the losing end. And unfortunately, that's just part of life. Example in research was done where subjects were asked to take a $5,000 investment. They had 2 choices. One provided a 15% gain 54% of the time. The other provided a 15% gain 43% of the time. So the only information they had was one would basically win 54% of the time, one would win 43% of the time. That's an easy choice. 100 times out of 100, we take the 54%. On average, we'll make much more money. What's interesting is then after that choice, a little bit later, the researchers randomly assigned a win or a loss to people and then asked them to evaluate their decision. What did they think of it? The winners, out of 7 points, gave their decision a 6.33. They made a very good decision. The losers, though, gave it a 4.57, right? A significantly lower number. The challenge is it's always the right choice to take 54%. But we look at the outcome and we think there must be something in the process that we did wrong. The old saying, you're never as good as they say you are when you win, or as bad as they say you are when you lose, isn't just an excuse for losers. It contains an important element of the truth. We need to recognize, so my friend Cade Massey said, there'd be a whole lot less drama in the world if people understood variance, even a little bit. So first challenge is outcome bias. The second challenge comes around idea of our mindset for learning. Carol Dweck and her co-authors have done great work around how we view intelligence. They've identified 2 views. One says it can always be improved. This is known as a growth mindset. The other says that individuals are endowed with a fixed amount of intelligence, a performance mindset. So the challenge when we take a performance mindset, we tend to focus on just the outcome. Are we good enough? Because if intelligence is fixed, then the outcome tells us, right, could we pull it off? Unfortunately, we know from before variance, right, gets in the way, but we've set ourselves up for failure. Now, they did some really interesting work looking at examining praising intelligence, kind of the outcome, or praising the effort that led to learning. They did random experience praising, say, hey, you're smart at these problems, or alternatively, hey, you worked hard at these problems. What they found was that those were praised for their intelligence. They viewed that intelligence as more fixed. Those who were praised for the effort, for a process focused, actually then saw their learning improve. They performed better on subsequent tasks and they enjoyed them more. Study of 7 Fortune 1000 companies that they did later showed the growth mindset, the idea that we can improve over time, is actually related to happier employees, more innovative risk-taking culture, and better performance. I did some research with colleagues looking at consultants and their growth mindset. We found those with more of a growth mindset more likely to have higher rated performance by supervisors and more likely to help others. Other research shows that the brain actually responds differently when we take this different view of intelligence. They completed tasks and measured the brain activity, and they found those with a growth mindset actually showed greater brain activity, enhanced what we call PE amplitude. It's a brain signal that captures the conscious attention that we give to mistakes. So it turned out the little engine that could in the folktale was right. I think I can leads us to do more, but unfortunately, I think I can't or I think I'm limited ends up leading us to incorrectly focus on just the outcome. The question then becomes, what do we do? And I want to focus on 3 steps. The first, emphasizing the process. We need to appreciate the role of process. Martha Graham was recognized by Time magazine as the dancer of the century. She's a dancer, a renowned choreographer who invented multiple techniques in modern dance. Has a great line. She said, technique is the dancer's freedom, right? The role of process sets you up to do more. But to get there, we have to prepare. We have to focus on practice, right? Dave Brailsford recognized this. Tachi Ono recognized this. Martha Graham recognized this. Do we spend time on practice? We think of this in sports, but why not in business? Why aren't we focused on how to sell that product, how to develop the next product, how to deliver the procedure, whatever that it might be? Finally, we have to recognize that process isn't something that just restricts us. Even if we go back to Frederick Taylor, known for scientific management and a focus on doing things in a fairly rigid way, Taylor said, the value of process was it lets a worker use his own originality and ingenuity to make real additions to the world's knowledge, instead of reinventing things which are old. Second, we need to make sure we measure the process. We look at a sport like baseball with inventions of tools like their StatCast tools that capture, say, the velocity that a ball leaves a bat. There's a switch from just batting average, did a player get a hit, to how hard did he hit the ball, knowing the harder you hit over time, the more likely you'll get good outcomes. We see this in companies too. Companies like Deloitte have moved from annual reviews, where they just look at the end of the year to what's going on, to constant check-ins, evaluating the process as you go along. Great quote from an HR executive saying, the challenge is how do you unlearn some things? How do you create new habits? We're trying to build that muscle. So shifting from just looking at the outcome to focusing on the process. Finally, we have to teach a growth mindset. Yes, we have initial views, but growth mindset can be taught. Research has found that managers with fixed mindsets were less likely to see their employees' talents and more likely to remain anchored in their initial views. But they did a random experiment where they taught some about a growth mindset, and they saw it increase their ability to identify opportunities to improve themselves and those they work with. They were more likely to take on challenges and to stick with them. And so these factors that push us towards a focus on outcomes are strong, but we can overcome them if we want to learn. To paraphrase Martha Graham, a process focus is the learner's freedom. Learning's hard. We're often our own worst enemy. But the good news is that you are the person you have the most control over. Living in a learning economy means that we must all approach learning around these 8 issues. We have to make sure that we're focused, we're fast, we're frequent, we're flexible. We're focused in that we choose which topics to learn and deeply work on them to gain the knowledge and understanding we need. We're fast as we accelerate quickly to move into new areas. It's frequent that we have to be open to learning. Opportunities present themselves sometimes in unexpected places. And finally, we're flexible. We may have to decelerate from what we're doing and switch to the next opportunity. But if we focus on the principles of dynamic learning, It helps us to not only cope with the inevitable change we'll encounter, but also to adjust, learn, stay relevant, and excel. Yes, when it comes to learning, you can be your own worst enemy. But if you recognize the challenge and seek to overcome it, with determination you can. I decided to become an academic to understand how we learn and then teach others about the process. I'd like to believe that my work will help others learn, but the good news is I know it's helped me do so. Dynamic learners are ready to work through these 8 categories. Good luck as you carry forward on your own learning journey.